the rock cycle. The land's changing, the landscape's changing. It changes really slowly, but it's always changing, and that's what the rock cycle is all about. For example, Central Texas used to be under the ocean. I find seashells in my yard. It's because things are always changing. Just really slowly when we're talking about rocks. There's a cycle. First of all, we got molten rock coming out of volcanoes. It cools down, makes hard rocks. And the wind, rain and ice grind it up into sand, which is washed down the rivers, and it piles up. And as it piles up, it gets squeezed into rocks. Those rocks get pushed down into the earth by more and more sand piling up on top of them, where they get hot and they change into another kind of rock. Eventually, some of that rock gets pushed right down into the molten rock that's most of our earth, and it melts again, and then we go round in a circle. It's a cycle. Lots of cycles in the environment. Our volcanoes. Okay, here's the earth. Most of it's liquid, most of it's molten rock. If the earth was about the size of a soccer ball, the crust, the hard bit on the outside, is as thick as a postage stamp. It's all that's holding all that molten liquid in. The bit that we stand on and dig holes in is only as thick as a postage stamp if the earth was as big as a soccer ball. Or if it's molten rock, we call it magma. Now where you've got a volcano, there's a hole in the crust, and that molten rock, that magma, squirts out and you have a volcano. So anyway, the magma flows out of the volcano. It cools to make rock, and you get different kinds of rock depending on how fast it cools down. I spent some time in Iceland years ago, and we climbed a mountain which was made of volcanic rock that had cooled very quickly, and it formed obsidian, which is like black glass. Seriously, this was a mountain made of glass. It was very cool. There's granite, basalts. Those are all kinds of igneous rocks. That's rocks that are made out of the volcano's magma as it cools. Now in time, there's erosion. Erosion is water, wind, glaciers, just kind of wearing away at things. You know, you've seen a river, you've seen water wear away at mud and cut a little channel through some mud. That's erosion. And glaciers are rivers of ice. It's a bit like glaciers are rivers of ice. They move very slowly, but they're very heavy. They happen because snow falls on the mountains, and it doesn't just fall off the mountains, and more snow lands on top, and eventually the snow keeps piling up that it starts to very slowly slide down the mountain. Only an inch or two a year, but it's very heavy. So as it slides, it pushes and it wears away the rocks. If you can see what kind of erosion happens by looking at the landscape. Water. If you got rivers and river valleys, you get V-shaped valleys because the river's running down the valley and it just wears a little bit away, and then the next year it wears a little bit more away, and it gradually goes down and cuts a V shape. If you've got a glacier that's big, sometimes they're like a mile wide, and they wear away everywhere, the sides as well as the bottoms, and they cut a U-shaped valley. Some of them even like polish the sides, they're very smooth. So erosion wears away the rocks and carries everything down the rivers, where it deposits it. Deposition, deposit. If you put money in the bank, you deposit it, you put it there. Deposition. And compaction, it gets compacted, squashed. So the river carries the sand out of the hills, and the sand all piles up. And you keep putting more and more sand on it. And as it keeps piling up, it gets heavier. And it starts to squash the sand at the bottom. It compacts the sand at the bottom. And eventually it compacts it and squashes it until it forms a rock, like limestone or sandstone. Limestone's the kind of rock we have here in central Texas. It's very soft, you can break it, it's easy to work with if you're building. You can break it with a hammer, you can scrape it with a chisel. Very soft. That's because it's just sand that's been squashed until it sticks. It's called sedimentary rock because they're sediments. Sediments are like the mud flowing in a river. Those sedimentary rocks can change. If more and more sand piles on tops, as more and more deposition, more and more sand ends up on top of the rock, it gets pushed down into the earth. And remember, the earth is very thin, the crust on the earth is very thin. And so as it gets pushed down, it gets hotter. And so then it's getting hot and it's being squeezed and it changes. It changes into metamorphic rock. Metamorphic means changed. I don't know if you know about diamonds. Diamonds are just carbon, but they're carbon that has been squeezed really hard, really hot. So if you could make a machine, they have made machines that can squeeze carbon and heat it up at the same time, and they can make diamonds. It just costs so much, well, they're more expensive than regular diamonds. But it metamorphosizes, it changes as it gets pushed down into the earth, squeezed and heated. And that's rocks like slate. Some people put that on the roofs of their houses, and marble. You see that in fancy bathrooms or banks or fancy buildings. Very hard rock, very hard. Not like limestone. That's because it's been changed. Eventually, if you keep pushing that rock down, it's going to end up in the center, back in the magma. Another way that happens is the continental plates. You may remember that the Earth has plates. That crust isn't solid. It's kind of plates moving around. And sometimes one plate pushes under another plate. You see, it gets pushed under another plate. It's called subduction. And you're just pushing the rock back into the magma and it's going to melt. And now we've gone full circle.